Okay, so I had to go back and redo this video because I totally screwed it up. Yeah, I mean, I just woke up and just had my first cup of coffee, so you got to excuse me. But anyway, in the last installment, I talked about the roots of the vampire mythos and how it fell into two camps initially, which was the Nosferatu and/or the Dracula, more of the gothic. Both of them are kind of more of the gothic style, and you had the attractive vampire, and then of course you had the hideous vampire, right? And then, of course, Anne Rice came along in the 70s and kind of took the idea and gave vampires personalities and gave them, made them individuals, right? Which was kind of, at the time, was kind of revolutionary. Well, in the 80s, those three concepts were expanded upon. And you had a lot of revisionist writers and filmmakers coming along and redoing the whole concept and the ideas. Now, there also was a couple of parody movies in the 70s. One called Captain Kronos, where the vampires were kind of homosexuals, right? It was kind of a big knock on it, and of course that's back before people got triggered and so sensitive about such things. But it's all right. I mean, it's for what it is. It's kind of funny. But for the most part, like I said, either it fit into the Dracula, like the Hammer horror films or whatever, it fit into the attractive vampire, or it fit into the ugly one, like Salem's Lot. Now, in the book, Count Barlow actually was a handsome guy, and they actually tried to redo that in the 2000s, and they did a miniseries with Rob Lowe and um, Rutger Hauer that actually had Count Barlow how he's supposed to be. But the change, people liked it. They thought it was pretty cool and it's pretty scary, and it's arguably one of the best television horror movies ever. So, anyway, so let's get to the 80s. So, in the early 80s, there's a film that came out, and the opening scene is the band Bauhaus doing Bela Lugosi's Dead, which is kind of a, if you're into goth culture, or if you're into, new wave or whatever, that's a very well-known song. And this movie had a very distinct 80s feel to it. And it starred a very young Susan Sarandon, and also starred David Bowie, and he was dabbling in acting in the early 80s. And the movie was made by Tony Scott, who was Ridley Scott's brother, and it has like a lot of very lush visuals to it. And it was based off of a novel by Whitley Strieber. And people forget that before Whitley Strieber got all weird and Alex Jones and into aliens and stuff, he actually did quite a few interesting novels that got turned into movies. And of course, now this one, and then there's another one which when I do the werewolf story, I'm going to talk about it, called Wolfen, which is kind of an interesting revisionist take on the werewolf mythos. But anyway, the book I'm talking about in the movie is The Hunger. And The Hunger, instead of it being the typical gothic, Eastern European, which is almost always the case in the other movies, this one it's more Egyptian, more ancient, and more mysterious. And it's more of kind of a pictures of Dorian Gray type concept. And at the time, the critics didn't like it. They said the acting was bad, it was poor, the cinematography was too jumpy, and it was too hip and too MTV or whatever. Nowadays, it's considered a staple of that genre of the time. Now, in the mid '80s, you had two movies that came out that both were relatively successful, and they added a little bit of depth to the concept. The first one was kind of a knock on the classic tropes of the vampire story, which was the Count Dracula and all that, and it was a very low budget and kind of a, I wouldn't say an indie movie, but it was kind of a kind of a schlock fest, and it was kind of meant to be kind of silly, right? It had a Roddy McDowall in it, and of course I'm talking about Fright Night. And Fright Night actually takes the Count Dracula concept and kind of puts him in the modern world and kind of goes wild with it. It's a lot of fun to watch the original. Now the remake came out. It's okay. It's pretty good. But I'd definitely recommend the '80s version because it's got a lot more humor to it. It's a lot more got a lot more deadpan humor and stuff like that. And it's pretty silly. And then another one came out, which actually to me is a little bit closer to The Hunger, in the sense that it is very cool, very MTV. It had a young Kiefer Sutherland, right? And it also had the two Corys, Corey Feldman and Corey Haim. And most of you guys probably know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about The Lost Boys. And The Lost Boys actually, again, added a lot of humor and a lot of fun to the genre. I mean, whereas before a lot of those movies were very serious and very kind of downer and all that, the Lost Boys had a lot of silliness to it, had a lot of ridiculousness to it. That was a part of the charm. And of course, the two Corys eat it up. I mean, they're probably whacked out on cocaine while they're doing it, but nonetheless, they're both having a good time, and the audience was having a good time. And it was very, like I said, very 80s, very fun. A lot of humor to go down with it. Now, in the shortly after Fright Night, and around the time that The Lost Boys came out, another movie came out, which has been a huge influence on more of your action-orientated vampire stories, which became a little bit more common with the Underworld series and stuff like that, more your action-oriented supernatural stories. And it was made by Catherine Bigelow. Now, what a lot of people don't know is long before Catherine Bigelow got praised for Zero Dark 30 and for the other, I'm trying to think what the other movie is. It's slipping me right now. But before she got praised for those two movies, she was attached to James Cameron. Him and her were actually boyfriend-girlfriend. And she actually made a movie in the late 80s that had a lot of his like special effects team, a lot of his camera people, and it looks like a James Cameron movie. That's why it shocked me the movie didn't do it bombed. I mean, I thought the look of it. I mean, you almost could mistaken it for being a James Cameron movie or a James Cameron film. But it has Bill Paxton and Lance Henriksen. And Bill Paxton, anybody that says that Bill Paxton was a bland actor, they never saw this movie, because I mean, he was eating it up and he was having a blast. And he played this this absolutely vile vampire. And it's kind of got an Old West setting. It's kind of in the modern day, and a lot of the tropes where vampires catch on fire when they go outside, like the special effects really rendered that really awesome. There's a lot of chase scenes, a lot of gun battles. I mean, typical James Cameron stuff. And it's kind of an Old West story. And again, it sent the genre into a more of an action direction, and it had some very lush scenery in it. And of course, the movie I'm talking about is Near Dark. And to me, Near Dark, it is a shame that movie wasn't more popular than it was, because it was so revolutionary for its time. And it was like, I mean, I'd never seen anything like it, And I'd seen a lot of vampire movies. I'd never seen anything. It wasn't philosophical. It wasn't artsy or revisionist, or it was revisionist, but it wasn't artsy or whatever. It was just a straight up, Wild Bunch, Sam Peckinpah / James Cameron style just romp. It was a lot of fun. And of course, like I said, it fell under the radar, and it gained a cult audience. And if you watch that and turn around and watch some of the modern movies like Underworld and some of those more action-oriented ones, you can see where the influence is, right? And Lance Henriksen does great. Bill Paxton does great. Now I'm going to end it with another movie which came out, which I think, and of course it was in the early 90s. This kind of takes place over the 80s, but this is in the early 90s. And this movie actually took the actual legitimate Dracula mythos and really expanded upon it. And now it's generally regarded as one of the classic renderings of the story. And it's from Francis Ford Coppola, the guy behind Apocalypse Now and The Godfather. And of course, the story I'm talking about is Bram Stoker's Dracula. Now, this movie is not perfect. Unfortunately, Keanu Reeves, he's great at doing action movies. He's great in The Matrix, but he's not very good in this one, because he has a really bad British accent. And at times he gets overwhelmed by Anthony Hopkins, who is a great actor. And Anthony Hopkins is having a blast. I mean, he's playing this really animated, British vampire hunter guy. It's hilarious to watch, especially when you got scenes with him and Keanu Reeves together. It's got Winona Ryder, and she's all right. I mean, she does pretty good. And of course, it's got Gary Oldman. This is back when Gary Oldman was the man of 1,000 faces. I mean, he goes all in to his portrayal of Dracula. But you get to see Dracula the way that Bram Stoker originally intended it, where he actually changes form. He's a bat, like a human-sized bat. He's a wolf. He can control creatures. He's old. He's young, and the set pieces and the action sequences. I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, Francis Ford Coppola, to me, I mean, he really went out on a bang on this one. But anyway, in the next installment, I'm going to talk about how the vampire legend went to television with the various renderings of that, and also some of the other stories that have come out since then, which I think are of note in more of the modern age. And but if you're interested in some stories that were a big influence on the modern day, especially in the last 15, 20 years, definitely check out The Hunger, because The Hunger, like I said, it's got that hipness to it, and it's got a kind of an interesting take on the story. And then watch the original Fright Night and the original Lost Boys. And watch those two. They're really good. They're the more successful, and definitely if you have not seen it, see Near Dark. Near Dark is a classic movie that unfortunately didn't do very well, but it really uh, put action in vampire movies like you've never seen it before. And I mean, to me, it actually still holds up fairly well to this day. I mean, even though it was made back in the late '80s or whatever. And now the next installment I'm going to talk about the '90s, and of course I'm starting with Bram Stoker's Dracula. I kind of talked about it in this one, and talk about how things had changed and how more genres got kind of bent with that concept. So, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope I give a little bit of insight, and I shall talk to you guys later.